camera, so I'm just gonna play it like that. All I'm doing is going over Mark Lanegan's audiobook. Some parts we haven't really listened to before, and I'm starting further into the book after he wrote about Kurt, but it still mentions Kurt and Courtney. So this is right after the murder took place. And I'll play this in little bits and stop it just so I can try to not get, I don't know, removed right away.
Chapter 22, Wilderness of Horrors. With Kurt gone, I lived close to the bone, estranged from family and all my non-using friends, haunted by my willful absence on the day Kurt died, disappearing into the painful wilderness of horrors my memories created for days on end. Always broke, I'd begun selling crack outside of my apartment building to street people, mostly Eritrean and Ethiopian migrants. I spent the profits on heroin. No matter how many drugs I did, I still couldn't escape myself. I couldn't sleep more than a few minutes at a time, usually sitting up in an uncomfortable wooden straight-backed grade school-style chair that sat near the noisy, wheezing old radiator under one of my windows, frequently awakened by the seagulls' incessant screaming outside. I was loath to ever lie down, convinced that if I did, I would never wake up. The result was mounting damage to my feet. My toes were constantly numb on the surface, but painful as hell when I walked around. If I accidentally knocked them against something while wandering my apartment in a mindless haze, the pain was excruciating. Courtney leaned on me nearly every other day, for company, for drugs, for emotional support, for a shoulder to cry on, and an ear to talk into. She told me that Kurt had been obsessively listening to my record Whiskey for the Holy Ghost often in the weeks before he died. I was horrified. Not only had I not responded when he was calling out for my help, a fact I naturally kept to myself, to the extent that I'd lied to a Rolling Stone reporter, saying I'd not heard from him for weeks previous to his death. But the thought that somehow my...
Oh, wow, that's big right there. He literally is admitting that he lied. I'm going to write down what time that was at.
Music had lent itself to a suicidal state shattered my already stunned psyche. Totally devastated, the sense of obligation I felt towards Courtney was turning out to be more than I could give. I felt torn between what I thought Kurt would want me to do and my natural inclination to avoid her at all costs. She was extremely quick mentally, with ferocious 20 steps ahead intelligence and a biting sense of humor that reminded me at times of Kurt himself. She was also very generous and always interesting in a whirlwind, over-the-top fashion. But life was too all-consuming, too dramatic, difficult, exhausting, and messed up in her sphere. As someone who largely preferred to go through the world unnoticed, the few times we were out in public together, she drew so much attention to herself, and by extension me. I was embarrassed, even pissed off. She talked me into seeing a movie with her and then chattered loudly throughout. Not only did everyone in the theater hate our guts, they also knew exactly who was making all the noise. The smart and outspoken widow of a beloved international rock star who some blamed as the source of his unhappiness and the cause of his suicide. Courtney took no shit, but was a publicly unpopular figure and a constant target for it.
So Mark Lanegan and Courtney Love are hanging out in the movie theaters after.
With increasing dismay every time I would see some TV show or magazine article where she was blamed or ridiculed. Worse still were the ongoing rumors of her possible involvement in a murder meant to look as suicide. Suddenly Dylan was also vilified. Kurt had talked him into buying the shotgun he'd used to kill himself under the guise that it was needed for home protection. Both Dylan and I had become...
So obviously Mark is lying right here.
Accustomed to performing these kinds of tasks for him simply because the imprisonment of his fame made going out into public a fucking drag he could not escape. The crackpot theories that insinuated Courtney and Dylan had conspired to murder Kurt were complete horseshit, but with her manic energy, she did sometimes take me to my absolute limit. At one point, Dylan said to me, "Fuck, man, if anyone was going to have me kill somebody, it would have been Kurt having me do Courtney." Something I knew actually made perfect sense. Whole guitarist Eric Erlandson, a thoughtful, caring, and
He's lying, but I wish it went that way.
intelligent guy I considered a friend, gave me
And maybe Dylan did say that to him.
stern talking to. I was not to score any drugs for Courtney. I took that to heart. Eric was the one person in our circle who I looked up to as a no-nonsense, even-keeled, steadying influence. He always seemed to be the rock in the eye of the hurricane, the proverbial boy who stood on the burning deck. It wasn't like I enjoyed playing that role in Courtney's life, but I felt as though I had inherited it. As she ratcheted up the intensity of her focus on me, I found it increasingly hard to live with and nearly impossible to get out of. I resolved to extricate myself from the situation. Something told me there was a 99% chance that shit would meet fan in the process. Early one morning, I heard her voice on my answering machine. "Hey, what are you doing? I want to see you. Come over." I ignored it. An hour or so later, I got another message, this one in a somewhat more seductive voice.
By the way, this is the guy who did that with Courtney and Dylan and some other people. He was right in our faces all along. We just didn't know it was him. We should have figured this guy lying and admitting to his lies from 1994 is the other person involved in it. And he's covering for Dylan and Courtney right here.
"Hey, sugar, I want to see you. What are you doing?" Again, I ignored it. She would give up and turn in another direction for solace soon. But throughout the rest of the day and well into the evening, calls kept coming. Her tone shifted from faux alluring to slightly harsh to finally, "You motherfucker, where the fuck are you? Call me back, you son of a bitch." As it got later, I grew tired of listening to these abusive messages and unplugged the machine altogether. And just in case she was motivated to come over, I turned off the front door buzzer. My mind a bit lighter after making the decision to disengage. I lit some incense, turned off the lights, put on a VHS tape of Seven Samurai with the sound off, and lay back on the couch with my feet out on the coffee table to try and catch a nod. Somehow, I fell into a deep sleep. I was awakened by a light knocking on my apartment door, voices in the hallway. I recognized instantly the fawning voice of my dickhead apartment manager, Christian, who I hated and who hated me. He had passed out flyers to everyone on my side of the building, telling tenants to report it anytime someone yelled up to my window, something I had instructed some customers to do if my lights were on. I'd not wanted certain fiends to have knowledge of my apartment number and thus buzz me incessantly all night. When I wanted to be left alone, I simply left the lights off. Christian was determined to get me either arrested or kicked out, preferably both. "I can't believe you're in my building," he gushed. "I had no idea Mark was a friend of yours." "Oh yes, we're very close. He was supposed to come over today. I'm worried about him." The other voice belonged to Courtney. It was clear she had this prick eating out of her hand. I tiptoed over to the door to hear them better, and by reflex grabbed the badly dented aluminum baseball bat next to the door. The next thing I heard blew my mind and enraged me at the same time. "Well, seeing how you are such close friends, I can unlock the door and let you in to take a look around, just to make sure nothing's wrong." He wasn't just sucking up to the famous person in his presence. I knew he also intended to take a look around my place and make note of any incriminating contraband.
Which is exactly what the police did with my case with Sarah Silverman. Fuck.
I quietly took a deep breath and suddenly
Oh, a celebrity's involved? Oh, we're just going to do whatever we want here now.
broke out in a cold, sticky sweat. My mind seized on the dark thought, and I silently lifted the chain lock off the door. The moment he opened it up, I would clock him with the bat, beat my sniveling apartment manager unconscious. I would be in my rights to do so if he were to enter without my permission. Wait a second. No, I would actually beat them both to death, Christian and Courtney both, put an immediate end to two separate but now entwined aggravations and let the chips fall where they may. I silently raised the bat. I could almost hear Courtney thinking on the other side of the door. I bent my knees, tensed my arms and shoulders, ready to uncoil the moment the door swung open. She took a breath. "Here it comes." "Oh well, I'm sure he's okay. We better not invade his privacy." And just like that, they left. I ran into her a couple weeks later. I said I'd been out of town for a family emergency, and that was it. By that time, she had new connections and interests that rarely included me anymore.
So that was chapter 22. I had to find 23.
Chapter 23.
There we go.
Go fuck a donkey.
What?
I had become known as a guy who could procure drugs for traveling rock bands. When the Lollapalooza tour came to Washington at the end of August, I was contacted by an old friend. I'd first met Paul Bearer when he was the singer for a Philadelphia band called the Serial Killers. He was a one-of-a-kind dude with a crazy, funny-as-fuck intelligence who shared my fiending black hole, all-encompassing love of opiates and all things bizarre. More provocative stand-up comic than singer, he was a favorite of mine ever since his band had opened for us in San Diego in the late 80s or early 90s. While I sat watching their set from the back of the empty room, his onstage banter had pissed off one of the only two other audience members to the extent that she'd thrown an entire glass mug of beer at his head from 5 feet away. He went straight into a hilarious retaliatory routine that included blowjobs at the Greyhound bus station restroom, unplugging the Slurpee machine at 7-Eleven, and most memorably, telling the woman to go back to Tijuana to fuck a donkey. Years later, I'd recited almost the exact same routine from memory while being mercilessly heckled by a drunken woman during a show in Seattle. It hadn't occurred to me that the Tijuana reference didn't exactly translate when spoken in the Great Northwest, but I'd waited years to unload it, so what the hell? Paul was traveling with the all-female Los Angeles band L7 on the tour. A couple of the L7 girls dabbled in dope, and in the past I'd scored for them, and they for me. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds were also on the Lollapalooza tour, and Paul had asked me if I could hook something up for Nick and bass player Martin Casey when they were in Seattle on a day off. I'd been a huge fan of Nick Cave for years. I felt a deep connection to his music, and he and the Bad Seeds had been a central influence on the solo records I'd been toiling away at for some years now. Once I'd collected some shit for these Australian musicians, I felt a bit of anticipatory excitement about meeting them, even if just in my capacity as middleman for small drug deals. When they showed up in a cab at my building, we went upstairs, politely did the deal, exchanging the dope for dough, and started preparing hits. As I sat at my dining room table trying to locate a vein, Cave looked at my fucked up arms, crisscrossed like a road map of Germany with huge, deep, red and black abscess tracks. "Damn," he said, "I guess you can't just pop into the can for a quick hit." I was a pariah in my apartment building and was especially despised by the young goth couple whose door was directly opposite mine. The nonstop daily parade of unwashed street people and air-trained crack addicts in and out of my apartment had them perpetually pissed off. As Nick, Martin, and I were leaving to go get some dinner, the couple just happened to be unlocking their door and entering their apartment. As we stepped out, they caught a glimpse of Cave standing there in his three-piece suit, his iconic jet black pompadour perfectly in place, and almost broke their necks doing a double take. Nick calmly noticed them freaking out. "Good evening," he said coolly. That was a small win for me. My neighbors never looked at me the same again.
Hey, isn't that spooky?
Just a sec. Now we have to find chapter 25, I think.
Lane had gone to Minnesota to attend a rehab program, and I wished him well. I supported any of my friends who tried to get clean, as I was often trying to kick on my own. Whenever anyone found out I was trying to kick, however, my efforts were greeted with raised eyebrows and rolled eyes from pals and using buddies alike. Neither Kurt nor Lane believed I would ever get clean due to my maniacal hunger for drugs and the length I'd go to get them. Both had said as much at different times in conversation with me.
I have to write that timing down. Chapter 24.
They both imagined they would kick for good someday, but that my chances of ever getting clean were next to nil. I had met a 50-something cab driver named Leon, an old-school black dude who had given me a ride one day. When we started talking, he let it be known that he got a large carry of methadone weekly from the VA that he'd sell to me if I was interested. I was, of course, very interested. I bought his 7-day dose from him every week. It became my backup plan for whenever I was unable to score. I would take a large bottle with me on the road whenever I toured. leaving it in the bus refrigerator with the sign written in bold black marker taped to it. Do not touch. I would also try to kick it home from time to time, bringing myself down using the methadone so brutally fast that I dragged myself through some pain. I'd make it 2 or 3 days off everything, then go right back to the needle. I got buzzed from the front door one afternoon. To my surprise, it was Lane. He'd put on a lot of weight, and I'd never seen him look so healthy. He'd come directly from the airport to my apartment after finishing rehab, jonesing to get high. Hey bro, you got anything on you? He asked, knowing that I most likely did. Are you sure you want to do that, man? You're finally clean, for real. Why do you want to start all over again? All I thought about the whole time was getting out and getting high. I never wanted to quit. I only did it to make everyone happy and shut them up. He cooked himself up a shot in my kitchen. I heard him puke into my sink the instant he hit the vein. He walked unsteadily out into my living room with a goofy smile, sat down on my couch, and nodded for hours. When he came out of it, I made him promise to not tell anyone he'd fallen off the wagon so soon at my place. I didn't want Jerry and the other Alice guys blaming me for his relapse. For years, he'd had a passionate on and off relationship with a girl named Demery, a friend of my ex-girlfriend Anna. It had been marked by dizzying highs and dark, depressing lows. A fellow addict, she was said to be somewhat indiscriminate when it came to sex, much like myself. Who knows, I thought, before I really knew him. Maybe it's an open relationship. But once we'd become friends, it became clear that her behavior caused Lane some pain. I'd gotten a glimpse into her straightforward approach before I'd even met him. Like Lane and I did, she and I encountered each other for the first time outside a Capitol Hill dope house. As I was leaving, she was going in. Hey there, aren't you Anna's boyfriend? I'm Demery. I was instantly attracted to this sexy, smiling creature. The first thought that rolled through my head was, damn. She had an alluring outward sexuality, a beautiful face, and the most extraordinary devilish eyes. Yeah, I am. Please don't tell her you saw me here, though. That would cause problems. I felt like such a jackass whenever I was compelled to ask a stranger to keep my secrets, but most addicts were keeping secrets from someone themselves. There was some semblance of a code of secrecy among certain junkies. No problems here, handsome.
I am going to write that on down too. 3 minutes, 20 seconds.
What are you doing right now? She asked with a coy smile. No plans, just heading home. Why don't you come home with me? We can get high and fuck. That came out of the blue. Her brazen, direct approach put me on my heels for a second. It struck me like a kick to the balls, a shockingly pleasurable one. I don't think that would be a very good idea. Thanks, but I can't. She grabbed my hand and said, come on, I'll never tell anyone. You're cute. I like you. Nobody's at my place. Come on, you won't be sorry. I was sorely tempted, but I had a feeling I would somehow end up very sorry. Your private business could spread quickly through the small, incestuous music scene. I had heard she was Lane's girlfriend from my own girlfriend, and had almost instantly found the reputation that preceded her to be pretty fucking spot on. It was the type of situation I found nearly impossible to pass up, but her connection to Anna and to this guy I'd not met but already deeply respected as an artist and whose singing I loved made me think twice. For once, I was smart enough to not take the bait. With more than a little regret, I again declined and walked home alone. But for quite a while afterward, it continued to play heavy on my mind and in my fantasies. Chapter 25, Night Out with Jerry. One night I went out alone to a local dive rock and roll bar, the off-ramp, to see a Judas Priest cover band. Located on a street parallel to the I-5 freeway, hence its name, it was a shithole I rarely ever set foot inside. I was friends with an acquaintance of the British singer Jim Jones of the London band The Hypnotics, and had visited him and his girlfriend once or twice in the run-down apartment they rented above the place. But other than that, I generally avoided the building. I'd seen Priest as a teenager, and still, after seeing hundreds of great shows over the years, it remained the greatest concert I'd ever attended, and I'd heard this band turned out an amazing imitation. After more than a few drinks while sitting at the bar and waiting for the band to hit, I noticed two guys come stumbling through the door, obviously quite wasted themselves. Jerry Cantrell, guitarist, singer-songwriter of Alice in Chains, and local hero and nice guy Tommy Niemeyer, guitarist of the influential and beloved thrash punk band The Accused. Jerry immediately came over and ordered drinks for the three of us. After watching about 30 minutes of the headliner and putting away half as many drinks, we wobbled unsteadily out the door, looking for a place to do some of the coke Jerry always had his pockets full of. My place was the closest, most obvious destination, so we hailed a cab and headed up First Hill. Always in hot water with my apartment manager, Christian, whose window was directly next to the front steps, I warned the two of them to remain silent until we got upstairs. Once inside, Jerry dumped a huge bag of coke on a plate and started cutting lines. I got a bottle of booze from the kitchen and we began one of those all-night coke and alcohol mind-melting sessions of intense yet instantly forgettable conversation. The kind you always regretted once the sun came up and your melon was pounding like Rod Carew had taken batting practice on your head all night, endlessly connecting his wooden bat with your skull, stroking single after single to the opposite field. After an hour or two, Tommy had clearly reached and then stepped way over and past his limit. "Guys," he said, "I gotta go. I have to do some stuff for my mom today and I can't bail on her." I really loved hanging out with Tommy, who was funny as hell and one of the sweetest guys ever. I hated to see him leave, but since I'd had not one loving or happy childhood memory of my mother, I let him go without a fight. Good on old Tommy for caring for his mom. It was an impulse I would never know. As he left, I suddenly remembered I had a commitment myself that morning, one I absolutely could not miss. Bob Pfeiffer was in town, and I had a breakfast meeting with him that there was no way I could get out of. If the trees were going to remain on Epic, some things were going to have to change, and Bob was hell-bent on giving me a dressing down. It wasn't something I looked forward to, but I knew it would be the end of us if I didn't attend and take it on the chin. "Fuck, Jerry. I just remembered I have breakfast with Pfeiffer at 9:30. What time is it? Jesus Christ, thank God I remembered." "Oh, fuck that, dude. You're coming out on the boat with me today. Forget Pfeiffer. What's he going to do, drop you?" "Yeah, that's exactly what he's going to do. Those guys have had enough of us, bro. We don't sell millions of records like you." He said point blank if I didn't come to breakfast, he was going to drop us. He's serious, man. I looked at the clock in my bedroom, 4:30 a.m. If I managed to fall asleep, I might get 4 hours or so. I could do it on that. "Jerry, hang out as long as you want. Make yourself at home. But I got to try and get some sleep or I'm fucked. Big time fucked." "Okay, man, I'm going to stay awake. Come with you to breakfast and then we'll go spend the day on my boat." "Okay, deal. Good night." I had a handful of Valiums and climbed into bed. I don't know how much time had passed, but I was fully asleep when I felt someone gently shaking my shoulder. "Lanegan, Lanegan," came the whispered yet persistent voice, waking me up. I opened my eyes to find Cantrell shaking me awake. "What, Jerry? What time is it?" "It's 6. I'm going to head out to my boat now. I can't stay awake for breakfast." "That's cool. I'll call you this week and we'll hang." "Okay," he replied, and then, "Hey, bro, do you mind if I borrow some of your porn?" "Sure, man. Take whatever you want. I'll see you later." And with that, I fell asleep, only to be rudely awakened by the incessant banging of my old-school alarm clock at 9. I stumbled out of bed, pulled on some jeans, brushed my teeth, and opened the closet near the front door to grab my coat. I stood staring into it for a minute. Something was not right. I pulled the light string and looked in disbelief into my previously packed closet. My closet had been cramped side to side, with a quarter refrigerator box filled with my lifetime's collection of porn. It had every magazine, videotape, and sundry item I had collected in my 20-plus years on the planet. It had held my nearly complete collection of Tracy Lord's catalog that Gary Connor had told me to get rid of when the scandal of her underage work had broken. Gone. All gone. That box must have weighed at least 100 pounds. In my hungover state, I realized I didn't have time to stand around pondering this mystery. I grabbed my jacket and headed down to Pfeiffer's Hotel, where I was treated to a hyper-aggressive monologue and schooled in Music Business 101 as if I were a child over some disgusting scrambled eggs and toast. After I assured and reassured Bob that I fully understood the importance of whatever it was he had blasted me with, he gave me a hug and a way harder than necessary slap on the back, and I groggily began the long walk back up the hill to my place. Weeks later, I ran into Jerry again. He claimed zero memory nor any responsibility for my missing porn collection.
chapter 27. Just a second.
Chapter 26.
Oh, 26.
Seasons of Madness. Even though Alice in Chains wanted to get him into a studio to record music that he seemed to have little interest in, Lane had started playing with Pearl Jam's guitarist, the big-hearted and talented Mike McCready. The two of them, along with an older bass player Mike had befriended in rehab named John Baker Saunders, and my drummer from the Trees, Barrett Martin, had started a band they named Mad Season. One afternoon, Lane called me up and asked me to meet him at the studio where they were working. When I arrived, none of the other band members were there. Lane promptly kicked producer Brett Eliason, my one-time tour manager and sound man, out of the control room. Let's write a song. You write a line, then I'll write one, and we'll just do it like that. Okay, I agreed.
Sorry, but I want to go over the beginning when he, talks about his life growing up.
Red, but Rain and Babe Running didn't register. My crystalline in my head. Gonna watch from the balcony. Sing backwards and weep. Prologue. Police. At first, his warning didn't register. My mind fixated on the pinprick ending of the morning's routine, the relief from what at this point was only a dull, aching pain. Police, the African cab driver whispered again in a thick accent, while motioning with a roll of the eyes and a quick hunch of his shoulders to look in the rearview mirror, where sure enough, the three young guys following in the van behind looked like undercover cops, eager to beat someone's ass, maybe mine. My 6'4" cross-dressing drug buddy St. Louis Simon and I had just scored a bag of dope and a bag of coke, both of which I had thrown somewhat carelessly in my unbuttoned shirt pocket. I had a sack of new rigs stuffed into the front pocket of my tight pants. As I hadn't expected to encounter the authorities today, now I felt totally exposed. Another 10 blocks across Seattle's Capitol Hill, and it was obvious we were indeed being followed. As the car pulled up just down the street from my building, I hopped out and started walking up the sidewalk, trying my best to act naturally. Simon got out the other side, and wearing a trailer park-style denim skirt and wedge shoes that made him even taller, started to cut across the gravel lot between buildings, where out the corner of my eye, I saw two guys tackle him to the ground. Not good. I was almost to the corner when a short young cop in jeans and muscle shirt suddenly jumped around in front of me, held a badge in my face, and said, "Hold on a second, buddy. Where are you off to so fast, buddy?" Hands raised automatically, I did my best full of shit, bewildered, what's this all about look. "I'm just going home," I pointed dumbly to my apartment building. "What's this?" he asked, reaching out to squeeze the drugs through the thin cloth of my shirt. "Hey, what the fuck, man? What do you want? I fucking live here." Pulling away from him in phony indignation, I quickly did in my head the calculations. How sick was I going to get before making bail? I hadn't done a shot yet that morning. Down the street, I could see both Simon and the cab driver sitting curbside in handcuffs, feet in the gutter, the entire back seat pulled out of the cab. "Okay, man, let's see some ID." In my mind, I could see my passport on the coffee table upstairs, covered in crack pipes, and the huge pile of used syringes next to it. That wasn't going to be an option. "I don't have it on me. My name is Mark Lanegan." The cop narrowed his eyes, took a hard look at me, then said, "Didn't you used to be a singer?" After walking me back down the street to the surveillance van, he took a small black and white photo off the dashboard. A guy they wanted for auto theft and who looked something like me. He had me sign it with a ballpoint pen, and then let us be on our way.
Oh, wow. See, they could have stopped more copycat suicides right then, but yeah. People are weak when it comes to celebrities. A lot of people. I'm just looking for a part 2.
Chapter 1. Childhood of the Fiend. With the umbilical cord wrapped around my neck, I was born by C-section in November 1964, and then came up on the wrong side of the Cascade Mountains in the small eastern Washington town of Ellensburg. My family were from a long line of coal miners, loggers, bootleggers, South Dakotan dirt farmers, criminals, convicts, and hillbillies of the roughest, most ignorant sort. They came from Ireland, Scotland, and other parts of the UK. My grandmother on my mother's side had been born in Wales to Welsh parents. The names of my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and parents came straight out of the Appalachians to the deserts of eastern Washington and every trailer park in between. Names like Marshall and Floyd, my grandfathers. Ella and Emma, my grandmothers. Roy, Marvin, and Virgil, my uncles. Margie, Donna, and Laverne, my aunts. Dale, my father. Floyd, my mother. My older sister had been given the name Trina. I was the only one who escaped with the non-backwoods, white bread name, a name I hated, but thank God for when I found out that my mother had originally intended to name me Lance. Lance Lanegan. I could think of nothing more humiliating or ridiculous and thanked my father for not allowing it. After that, I could live with Mark, but I always preferred to simply be called by my surname, Lanegan. If I were introducing myself to a stranger, I would always use my middle name, William. As if by telepathy, though, that was how most of my teachers, coaches, and acquaintances referred to me, Lanegan. Both of my parents had come from backgrounds of extreme poverty and cruel deprivation. Both of their lives had been transformed by tragedy when they were young. Both of my parents were the first members of their large families to go to college. Both became school teachers. School was something I just could not do. Caged behind a desk, I never tried to pay attention to what was being taught. I was often lost in daydreams about my first love, baseball. After school, I'd spend hours playing game after game in a makeshift field on a neighbor's property until it was too dark to see. Finally, I'd shuffle slowly home to endure the inevitable torrent of verbal abuse from my mother. The main focus of her rage, although there were many brutal angles to her attacks, was the fact that I was never home. She herself was the reason I stayed away. To avoid her corrosive mental beatdowns, both my older sister Trina and I looked for any excuse to be elsewhere. From my earliest memories, Trina and I were also at each other's throats. And since my father was hardly ever home, it meant I was at both females' mercies at all times. The only thing that ever seemed to give my mother pleasure was bullying and ridiculing me and anything I showed interest in. One of her favorite rote sayings as she slapped me in the face was, "You're not my son." How I wish that were true. As a 6-year-old child, she had witnessed her father being murdered on the front lawn of her family home, then had been raised in all-male logging camps where her mother worked as a cook. She had then grown into a toxic adult, a piece of work, as my father would say. When my parents split, I gladly opted to remain with my father. Though he'd always projected a deep, quiet sadness around him, he was a good-hearted and caring man who meant well. But from the time I was very young, he could not control me. I shoplifted Snickers, Three Musketeers, Milky Way, and Almond Joy candy bars from the Bales grocery store across the street from my school, and then sold them to my classmates at a discount. I became obsessed with playing quarters, a game where the participants tossed coins off a wall. Whoever landed closest to the wall won all the money. I spent every spare minute rounding up kids to play and would get pissed when the bell rang to return to class. A close friend's father was a gambling device salesman who traveled to bars and taverns around the state, selling punch boards and other amusements for the drunks to waste their dollars on. One weekend, I stayed at my friend's while his parents were gone. "Hey, Matt, let's get in and check out your dad's stuff." That was all it took. We climbed through a window into the barn where his dad kept his merchandise. I grabbed a few punch boards from his stash and took them home. Even then, I was plagued with this devilish, obsessive focus, and whenever I saw an opportunity to get over, it kicked in hard. With nothing but time on my hands, I went to work. Over the next few days, I painstakingly split the boards open with a flat-edged screwdriver, extremely careful to not leave any obvious marks of damage. I then spent hours carefully unrolling the tiny pieces of paper inside, removing the ones with the $20, $50, and $100 winning numbers, replacing the $1, $2, and $5 winners and other non-winners back into their slots. Then I carefully glued both halves of the board back together. My handiwork was so tidy you couldn't tell anything had been done. I carried the boards in my gym bag from class to class all day and sold punches to kids for $1 a shot. No one ever won the big money, of course, since I had already removed all those slips, much to my friend Matt's amusement. My obsessive hustling consumed my every day, every action, every thought. It was the first thing on my mind upon waking and the last thing I thought about before going to sleep. It made me an unpopular figure amongst some of the other students who were overwhelmed by my aggressiveness, my willingness to take their money. But it never mattered how much or how little money I had. I only came alive with the inventing of ways to get it and the action of getting it. It would get worse. While in junior high, I began stealing a few cans of beers from my old man's endless supply and started smuggling them to school in my gym bag. He was also a carpenter and had built a full-size bar and a room to play cards with his cronies in next to my bedroom in our basement. He built them out of old wood he'd gotten for free by doing demolition of barns in the area. I drank the purloined beers in an unused janitor's closet between classes or behind some tall bushes on school grounds at recess. I began smoking weed, only one of 3 junior high kids in my small rural town who did. I became a petty thief. Every class period I would ask to use the restroom, and then I'd make my way down to the gym locker room where I'd rifle through the pants of all the kids who didn't lock their stuff up. Change, paper money, whatever was there I'd take. The only class period I didn't steal was my own, and I was never caught. My father spent scant time trying to parent me. Due to his own prodigious drinking schedule and his lifelong interest in playing cards all night with his pals and chasing women, he quickly gave up trying to enforce any kind of control. That happily left me to run feral in the streets. After the unpleasant years under my mother's thumb, I loved my father for this new freedom to explore my current compulsions, my wild fascinations, my burgeoning perverse fetishes. I felt like the luckiest kid I knew. No rules, no curfew, no nothing. By age 12, I was a compulsive gambler, a fledgling alcoholic, a thief, a porno fiend. My porn magazine collection was massive. I'd found most of it by spending hours going through the dumpsters near student housing on the college campus. I had trouble finding a place to conceal it all in the large split-level house I shared with just my father and a couple of dogs. Hiding anything I wanted kept private had become a necessity when my folks were still together. When I was 9, my mother had discovered a box of unused condoms I'd fished out of a garbage can, and she'd hit the roof. Shortly before my folks split up, she found a pop pipe in my room and insisted I see a psychologist. He told me, "I think it's your mother that needs counseling, not you." Still, the only thing my dad would not abide was his 13-year-old son smoking marijuana. I sometimes hid my weed and smoking apparatus, bongs, papers, and whatnot, in the doghouse under our carport. Several times I discovered my shit not disappeared but destroyed, either stomped by boot or smashed by hammer. I wised up and got the message and found new hiding places. My dad believed actions spoke louder than words. I could probably count all the conversations of deep importance we ever had on 1.5 hands. One evening he called me upstairs. "Mark, come on up here. We need to talk." I assumed the cops had come looking for me again, told him what they thought I'd done, and had given him a time frame in which to bring me into the station. "Sure, Dad, what's up?" "Well," he said, "I'm a teacher, and my classes are made of kids who don't have half the opportunities or skills or drive that you have. Every year, 1 or 2 new students arrive, and I get an overwhelming feeling that they will one day end up in county lockup, prison, or in an early grave. You'd be surprised at how often it comes true. Son, I get the same feeling watching you making your way through life, just however you please. You think the rules that apply to the rest of us people don't apply to you. I'm talking to you tonight because I've come to the conclusion that even though you've already learned a few tough lessons, you have many more coming. You're going to have to learn them a very hard and painful way. You are exactly like your Uncle Virgil. He had nothing but pain, turmoil, and trouble from the day he was born until the day he died. My Uncle Virgil had died of terminal alcoholism in an old folks' home at age 43. He had crisscrossed the country for years, hitching rides on hundreds of trains, an actual hobo. As a college student, my dad had been burdened with the task of traveling around the Northwest to pay my uncle's bail. He'd had to get Virgil out of jail so often that he'd obviously developed some resentments. Virgil rode the rails until one night he fell under a train, drunk, and it cut off both his legs. My father told me he had been in his brother's hospital room when Virgil came to and realized his legs were gone. What did he say? I had asked him. With his typical spare language, my father had replied, well, he wasn't too goddamn happy. While cleaning out my grandmother's house after she died so it could be demolished, my father and I had found a shoebox full of postcards Virgil had written from every part of the U.S. Each one started the same, telling where he was writing from, then what menial job he was working. Each one ended exactly the same. Every single one of them sent to his mother. Mark, my father said, you seem unable to change. You refuse to be teachable. Teachable. That was one of his favorite words. I forced myself not to roll my eyes. So I'm suggesting you start right now to toughen up, and by that I mean smarten up. I'm not talking about fighting. You do that enough already, and I'm tired of paying for your broken hands. It seemed every other altercation I got in, I broke a knuckle. You need to toughen up your mind and body. The places you're headed, son, you will need every ounce of strength and all the wits that you have in order to survive. I don't know why, but you just came out of the box this way. Just like Virgil, goddammit, he said, shaking his head. It was true. Out of everyone I knew, I was seemingly the most uncanny human shit magnet ever manufactured. Brawling had been a constant from grade school through high school. At age 14, I'd been punched in the face by a grown man outside a small tavern at the edge of a trailer park after asking him to buy beer for me and my buddies. I even carried a lifelong small black dot of a tattoo on my face from where a kid had buried a pencil in it, attempting to put out my eye one day. Yet, as a young child, sitting on the floor near where Virgil sat in his wheelchair, a blanket on his lap, he struck me as the exact opposite of the troubled, morose picture my father had painted of him. When I knocked on the hollow cosmetic prosthetics he wore under his pants, he'd lean his head back and roar with laughter. His raven black, slick back hair reminded me of Elvis Presley. One day I saw a strangely compelling photo of a shirtless man on the cover of Cream magazine at Ellensburg's lone comic book record store, Ace Books and Records. I asked the owner, Tim Nelson, who it was. That, my friend, is Iggy Pop. In the culturally isolated cow town where I lived, all that was played on the local radio station was country music. No one in Ellensburg even knew who Jimi Hendrix was, born only 100 miles away in Seattle. Tim played me some early punk rock 45s, and I was instantly grabbed and fucked hard. The Sex Pistols' Anarchy in the UK was the revelation that changed my life instantly and forever. I was mesmerized by this aggressive and snarling music. As a little kid, I'd owned one Alice Cooper record and listened to it obsessively, but this was something exotic, something that spoke to me in a way I couldn't articulate. All I knew was I had to have more. Within a couple of days, I'd traded in all the comic books I'd collected as a child for records. The Sex Pistols, Damned, Stranglers, the Ramones, Iggy, David Bowie, the New York Dolls, and Velvet Underground. It was a veritable miracle that these records could even be found here, but Tim Nelson was a unique cat who looked like a hippie, but had broad taste and a curiosity for the new and different. I thank God I found them, and I listened to these records in solitude for years. Frequent run-ins with law enforcement did little to improve my opinion of authority figures. At 15, I was brought in and questioned about some car stereos that had been stolen from a dealership lot. When I failed to give up the name of the guy I knew was responsible, Captain Kuchin himself came in the room and was left alone with me. Fabian Kuchin was a notoriously hard character. He had performed the job of local enforcer brutally for several years. One arm was in a cast from some rough arrest or bar brawl. Son, I'm going to ask you one more time. Who lifted these stereos? I don't know. The instant the words left my mouth, he clubbed me in the head with the cast on his broken arm, knocking me off the chair and onto the floor. Maybe you'll give it a little more thought the next time I ask you something. That wouldn't be the last time cops would kick the shit out of me in Ellensburg. A few years later, while leaving a 4th of July celebration, I was whacked in the nuts and the back of the head by baton-wielding deputies who had me face down on the asphalt. Kuchin got busted a few years later for selling a couple of ounces of cocaine to some undercover federal agents. He was given a measly $25,000 fine and a year of work release. A prime example of the corruption endemic to my town's local law enforcement, who had always had a hard-on for me. I rejoiced at the news of Kuchin's arrest anyway. I had always wished him the worst. In high school, I played baseball, which I loved, and football, which I loathed. I was one of 2 quarterbacks on our team, and we were terrible. Sure, I could throw, and the other quarterback could run, but that didn't add up to a winning combo. Our tight end was a giant, already 6'7" at age 16, a strong, fast, and powerful player, but with hands like a kitchen sieve. Whenever I dropped back to pass in the few seconds I had before being crushed by the opposing defense, he was the only target I would ever see. No matter how many times I threw a strike, the football bounced laughably off his hands, helmet, face mask, or torso. He went on to a successful decade-long career in the NFL, but as a lineman, a brute just there to block and never touch the ball. After most games, we'd limp off the field, defeated, carrying our black and blue asses into the locker room in our otherwise useless hands. And I was the odd man out. Despite playing a position that predisposed leadership, most of my teammates treated me with barely concealed contempt. I couldn't fathom their concern for their grade point averages, cheerleader girlfriends, and school functions. I laughed to myself when I watched them working so hard together as a group to cheat on their schoolwork. I didn't even give enough fucks to cheat. I never did one piece of homework my entire high school career. I couldn't have cared less if I failed or by some twist of fate passed any of my classes. For that, I was treated with a mixture of curiosity, dislike, and fear. I kept to myself and took no shit. That enticed some of the supposed tough guys to try and poke the bear. On a bus ride home from another loss, someone asked to hear what I was listening to on my Walkman. My punk rock playlist was diplomatically passed around so every member of the team could partake in my ridicule. I'll never forget how they laughed and looked at me as though I were crazy. A running back, one of the most popular guys on the team, threw an ice cube at my head to amuse his friends. I broke my hand punching him out in the rear of the bus, and then spent the rest of that season playing running back myself, my throwing hand in a hard cast, wrapped in several layers of foam rubber and tape. In the off-season, I was a full-blown alcoholic. Each day on my way home from school, I got off the bus while still in town, stopped at a grocery store, and shoplifted a pint bottle of MD 2020, a fortified wine more commonly known as Mad Dog. I would slip the flat bottle down the front of my pants, casually stroll out the door, then walk up the street to the park to drink it. Then I would go back and get another one. Those flat bottles, it was like they were designed to make that rock gut wine easier to steal. After my second bottle, I'd stop by the college campus to rip off a bicycle. Then it was a drunken, harrowing ride, often broken up by a few wipeouts before I came to a canal that ran through the fields about a half mile from my house. There I would toss the bike in the water, cross the bridge, and walk the rest of the way home. This went on for a couple of years. My father was arrested for drunk driving and had his license to drive taken away. This coincided with my passing driving class, and while everyone else my age got their certificates in cars, I had to wait until my father was legal again with fully reinstated auto insurance before I was able to get my own. He spent 6 weekends in jail and paid a fairly hefty fine. It burned me up that 6 months after passing my test, I still couldn't legally drive. After what felt like an eternity of waiting, I got my driver's driver's license at almost age 17. Late one afternoon, I took a girl for a ride down the dirt road adjacent to the canal to drink some beer and hopefully fuck. At one point, she got out to urinate in the bushes. When she came back, she was vibrating with excitement. "Mark, you've got to come over here and see this." She walked me over to the now dry canal, littered with the rusted-out, reed-covered skeletons of 70 or more bicycles. I felt the thief's guilty flush creep up the back of my neck. "Weird," I said, and then steered her back to the car. All my secret shit. There was no way I was then or ever going to give any of it up. Summer of my senior year, I finally decided, fuck football. My only friend on the team, a tough and savvy, streetwise surrogate big brother named Dean Zeke Dazinski, had graduated the previous year. He'd been my drinking buddy, advisor, and on a few occasions when I'd needed it, protector. While going in to suit up for practice one day, I'd found my helmet filled and dripping with soda. The prankster had been the biggest, heaviest lineman on our team, an extremely large, dark-skinned black guy who weighed well over 300 pounds named Waddell Snyder. I was a frequent target of his jokes and abuse, and he rarely missed an opportunity to give me shit. The entire team had watched in awe after practice that day as Zeke spent 10 long minutes putting the most intense, calculated, physically dismantling ass-kicking I'd ever witnessed on the huge, slow, hapless, loudmouth bully. He connected punch after pummeling punch to the big kid's face until it was nearly unrecognizable. Needless to say, Del Snyder never so much as spoke to me again. Had also been completely out of step with my other teammates and their juvenile concerns, and had hated our head coach from the beginning. The way he bossed me around like I was a private at boot camp had never sat right with me. When I declined to show up for the first day of summertime practice for what would have been my last season, our coach decided to make a personal appearance at my house. When he failed to reel me back in, he got angry, pointed a finger at my chest and my yard, and called me a quitter and a loser. My dad, who was also a teacher at my high school, finally came out of the house. "Hey, Coach," he said nonchalantly, "why don't you get the fuck off my property before I call the cops?" I laughed out loud. Although every other word out of my dad's mouth was goddamn it or bullshit, I'd never in my life heard him say fuck. That he saved it for my coach, his coworker, brought me untold amounts of joy. After drinking for hours at my house with a friend one night, I talked him into executing a dark idea that had haunted my mind and rolled around my head for several years. We drove deep into the countryside in my friend's Jeep until we found the van that belonged to my probation officer, who I detested. It sat in a field being used to store hay for her husband's cattle, a utility vehicle to cover the several acres of property they owned. While my buddy stole engine parts and tools, I destroyed the van with a sledgehammer. On the way home, the car stereo between the two front seats started to short out. When we both reached down to jiggle it back to life, my friend took his drunken eye off the road, sending us straight down into the deep ditch alongside the pavement. I was tossed out of the Jeep and thrown violently across the asphalt. I went to brush the hair out of my face and it all came off in my hand. I was partially scalped, the side of my head badly lacerated. My friend, who was driving, had his thumb torn off. We walked almost a mile to the nearest farmhouse, my pal holding his thumb in place, moaning in agony, blood gushing out of the hole in his hand. It was 4 a.m. when we banged on the door for help. We were greeted by the homeowner pointing a shotgun at our faces. As we stood in his kitchen waiting for an ambulance, I stared at the huge pool of our blood collecting on the ancient linoleum tile floor. I was read my rights by a cop while lying in a hospital bed. When my case went to trial, my previous offenses were taken into account: vandalism, car prowling, multiple counts of illegal dumping of garbage, trespassing, 26 tickets for underage drinking, shoplifting alcohol, possession of marijuana, bicycle theft, tool theft, theft of car parts, theft of motorcycle parts, urinating in public, theft of beer keg and taps, insurance fraud, theft of car stereos, public drunkenness, breaking and entering, possession possession of stolen property, and on my second arrest for urinating in public, a disorderly conduct charge. I was convicted on the vandalism, theft, and underage drinking charges, but taking into consideration my long juvenile record, they sentenced me to 18 months in prison. I would do my time at Shelton, the medium security prison in Washington. As I stood in court to hear my sentencing, the judge reviewed my rap sheet, then addressed me directly. Has anyone ever tried to get you help for your problem, son? I said nothing. Looking at this record, it's glaringly obvious that you are an alcoholic and a drug addict. Every single one of these charges is drug and alcohol related. I still said nothing. Madam Prosecutor, I find it somewhat difficult to comprehend your willingness to send an 18-year-old boy still in high school to prison. I am shocked that it did not occur to you to help this kid. Mr. Lanegan, I'm giving you a once-in-a-lifetime chance. I strongly suggest you do some soul-searching and self-reflection. I am suspending the sentence on the condition that you complete a year of outpatient substance abuse treatment. You are also hereby ordered by the court to take regular supervised doses of the drug Antabuse. If you fail to meet these requirements to the T, I'll have no qualms about sending you to Shelton for a year and a half. I walked out in a daze. I knew the judge had cut me a huge break, but my biggest concern was how I'd be able to drink while taking a drug that existed solely to make you deathly ill if you drank. As a kid, in the middle of wintertime at a local park, I'd seen a Native American man drink after he'd taken it, and he'd become wretched, lying on his back on a picnic table, groaning in misery. I knew better than to tempt fate and to drink alcohol during my court-ordered year of sobriety. But in 1982, nobody in my program even got piss tested. I continued to sell and use weed and acid daily. Almost every day before school, I'd eat a small hit of acid, do a couple hits of weed, and hop in my truck and head to class. 4 nights a week, I went to my program. Many times in group, when the counselor went around the room asking everyone, clean and sober today, I'd be stoned or lightly frying on acid. 2 weeks into my final season of baseball, I was having my best year ever, by far. Even though it was still early in the season, I was nonetheless hitting .700, sometimes batting cleanup or fifth, depending on the opposing lineup, the 2 power spots in the batting order. Pitching had become practically effortless. I was brought in as a closer in the final couple of innings if we were leading. Throwing at least twice as hard as our starting pitcher, I either struck out batter after batter or wildly beamed them in the body or in the head, giving them a free ride to first. Without well-deserved reputation for wildness, I already had the advantage as opposing hitters stepped in because no one wanted to get hit with a fastball, and I once or twice closed the game with 3 straight strikeouts. Finally, after years of mediocre seasons, my burning desire to win was being fulfilled, and it was rumored that scouts who worked for college teams had begun to turn up to see us play. Although with my 7 stories below average grades, it was a virtual impossibility that I'd ever make it to college. Baseball had provided escape from my mother as a child, but it was doubtfully going to be my ticket out of the stagnant puddle of piss that Ellensburg had become to me. Our high school vice principal turned up at practice and pulled Coach Taylor aside. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but when my coach threw his hat to the ground and got up in the administrator's face like an angry pro manager arguing a call with an umpire, my teammates laughed. I laughed along with them. Then the coach called me over. It had been brought to the school's attention that I had failed the home economics class a previous semester and thus had not passed the minimum amount of classes required to participate in sports. The vice principal had been informing the coach that my baseball career was over. Taylor wasn't ready to accept this decision, so he went to the home economics teacher who had blown the whistle on me in the first place. She made a deal with him. If I could get to school an hour before regular classes began and take her class again, then I could continue to play baseball, the only thing I cared about. I worried how I'd be able to get to school at a time when I'd normally be doing bong hits in my bedroom, but I agreed to the deal. I would have agreed to anything to be able to keep playing. My first day of early morning home economics part 2, my teacher had a few things she wanted to get off her chest. Mark Lanegan, you're one of the students I watch walking around this school who make me sick to my stomach. This I had not anticipated. I know you think you are Joe Cool, but I'm here to tell you that you're sadly mistaken. What you are is a piece of trash. I only agreed to this because I want you to see what you're really made of, although I already know. And don't think you're fooling me or anyone else. I'm well aware you're taking marijuana every day. That last part, she'd nailed correctly. If you think this is going to be easy, then again, you are mistaken, my friend. You'll find this class to be much more difficult now, since the last time you were here, you seemed to think it was some sort of joke. It's no joke, buddy. You will have a ton of homework, and I will expect you to have it finished every morning when you arrive. If you are ever late with anything, then our deal is off. I wish you the best of luck. All of this at 7 in the morning? I was confused at her hostility because although I'd been absent during much of her class the previous semester, I was never one to cause problems, raise hell, or even talk in class. Sure, I'd received an F on my end of semester project, the easiest thing to make. It consisted of simply sewing 2 pieces of nylon material of the exact same length together. But it, like almost anything that involved some bullshit skill I knew I would never need to know, proved to be beyond my capabilities. Somehow, I'd rubbed her the wrong way, and she took delight in the payback. I was no math wizard, but I easily added up the score to this one. She'd agreed not to help me, but to inflict pain, and to make it impossible for me to comply. She may as well have been my own mother. I felt an unfamiliar sadness welling up in my chest. My lifelong dream of playing baseball was done. Besides punk rock and getting loaded and laid, it was the only thing in life I cared about. Here I was yet again, a piece of detritus, seemingly destined for the shit heap. Thanks for opening my eyes to your kind intentions, Mrs. Stevens. I guess I have no option other than to decline your generous offer. I turned and left. When I showed up late to practice that day and handed my coach my carefully folded uniform, he looked like he was going to cry. Or maybe I just felt like I might myself. I'm sorry, Coach, I said, but the deck is stacked. I can't do it. She never intended for me to be able to. I barely squeezed out of high school with a below D- average on a phony diploma cooked up by some of my dad's sympathetic coworkers. I completed my year's drug and alcohol program, and a court-appointed attorney then petitioned the court to have my entire juvenile and adult record expunged. I moved into a college housing duplex project, working for the owner shampooing carpets all day and selling weed and acid and partying all night. One late afternoon, I ate way too much acid and had an extremely long, extremely bad trip. My friends had to roll me up in a carpet to restrain me. The next morning, I took a bong hit and it catapulted me right back into my LSD nightmare. After that, every time I attempted to smoke weed, it would instantly thrust me back into that same terrifying place. My routine of staying off alcohol by constant use of marijuana and LSD went out the window. I submitted wholly to alcoholism. I blacked out nearly every time I drank. I owned a Yamaha 750. I'd originally had my eyes on a used Triumph chopper, but was short the cash to get it and consoled myself with what I considered an inferior Japanese bike. I loved that 750 anyway, the sense of freedom it gave me while riding. I often rode my motorcycle hundreds of miles while blacked out and with no helmet. I would come to in some unfamiliar rundown motel, staggered to the front desk and ask, "What time is it?" And "What day is it?" And then, "What town is this?" Head pounding with a terrible hangover, I'd wander around some shitty town I had zero recollection of until I found my bike. Somehow I pulled off the miracle of this crazed routine over and over again without dying. The only time I dumped the thing was when I had to stop at a red light. Too drunk to hold it up, my machine and I would fall harmlessly to our side. My high school girlfriend Deborah had quit college, come back to town, and moved in with me. I resolved to quit drinking and then spent a hellish year attempting to quit and failing. I couldn't get past Friday night. I would drink for 24 hours, no drugs, just drinking and not sleeping. Then I'd be unconscious for 24 hours. Then 48 hours of the DTs. I'd lie on my back in bed with the big black rotary dial telephone sitting on my chest, just waiting to call an ambulance because I was sure that at any moment I was about to die. Come Friday, despite my best efforts to maintain sobriety, as the day went on, I would find myself coming out of my skin until at some agonizing point I'd inevitably fold and do it all over again. It was an unbearable roller coaster ride that took such a toll, mentally and physically, that I actually contemplated suicide. If this was how life was going to be, I'd be better off dead. While working as a mechanic's assistant during harvesting season in the local pea fields, I made up my mind to leave for Las Vegas, where my cousin said he had a job for me at his restaurant. The day before I was to escape my life of drudgery in redneck rural Washington, my legs got crushed by a tractor in an industrial accident. I was bedridden, in excruciating pain, lost in anger. I'd never make it out of Ellensburg alive. Deborah had suffered enough by now and had left me for her boss at a pizza place. In a fury, I knocked out all the windows in my apartment with the end of one of my crutches, then fell into brooding despair. After 3 days of no sleep and constant silent rage, I realized that I'd made it past Friday night. I'd been trying to do that for a year. I'd been reviled as a town drunk before I could even legally drink. I'd had a full beard at 18 years old and started drinking in bars, always blacking out and bringing unwanted attention to myself in ways that often resulted in violence. More than once, I woke up in jail and had to gingerly pull the pillow off my face, stuck to it with my own blood. Now that heartbreak had gotten me sober, I developed a bad case of insomnia and spent my nights wandering around Ellensburg on foot, chain smoking. At times, I'd be stopped and questioned by the police. They had been on my back since day one, and it gave me some small satisfaction when they saw I was not drunk or guilty of anything and had to let me go. Shortly before I turned 21, I found myself in the unlikely role of rock singer in an up-and-coming underground band with plenty of opportunity for female companionship. Thank God Deborah left me. The first time I saw Van Connor, he was just a little kid lying in a wading pool in his front yard, smiling at me as I walked to grade school. In a town of 8,000, I always knew who he was after that, but we didn't interact. We met again by chance during a stint I did in detention hall during my final year of high school. He was only a sophomore, but in 6 years he was the only other person I'd encountered in Ellensburg who appreciated punk. He and his brother Lee were both gigantic, over 6 foot, maybe 300 pounds. Van would come to my apartment, buy and smoke some weed, and we'd laugh and listen to records. I ran into him again after I'd quit drinking. "Hey man, good to see you. What have you been up to?" "Nothing really, just looking for a job. I need to make some dough and get out of here. I don't sell weed anymore. I don't even smoke anymore, or drink." "Hey, you know what? Just today my dad said we needed to hire someone to do repo work for the store. You're perfect for it." "What do you mean?" He had my interest. "We need someone to go and take back the TV sets and VCR from the trailer trash who don't make their payments." "Fuck yes, I'll do that. When can I start?" "You can start today. Let's go talk to Gary." I found it slightly odd that Van only ever referred to his parents by their first names, but they were known around town as an eccentric family, 7 kids and 4 of them abnormally large for their ages, or any age for that matter. Gary Connor was an ex-grade school principal who now ran the most popular video store in town, renting all manner of videos and selling electronics to mostly lower-income people on a rent-to-own plan. He hired me on the spot. My dad had given me his truck when he'd become a hermit and moved to a cabin deep in the Cascade Mountains, a place he had to snowshoe in and out of in order to reach the road. The truck was a 53 Chevy with 3 on the tree. I began making daily trips all over the county, taking back what people didn't want to give me. I was a pretty big guy, 6'2" and 185 pounds. In rural Washington, violence was just something you grew up with, as common and banal as fast food. I'd learned quickly not to take shit from anyone. As a kid, my friend Dzinski had taught me to throw a punch the minute anyone attempted to bully you. As a loner with few friends, an outcast, and a frequent blackout alcoholic, that lesson served me well. That crucial first punch didn't always settle it, though, and violence became just another way of communicating, a second language I quickly became fluent in. The rednecks and poor people whose stuff I had to take, they were also made of pretty rough stock. I carried with me on the job an aluminum bat and a stolen .22 pistol with a bat pulled to the right. I had confrontations with people almost daily, but I usually got what I came for. There were a few times I let discretion be the better part of valor and had to return to Gary empty-handed. He'd have to take the delinquent buyer to court, and I'd lose my commission. But fuck it. It wasn't worth killing someone over a TV set. I would enter the store through a door in the rear that led into a huge back room where Van and Lee, his older brother by several years, rehearsed with their band. Van on vocals, Lee on guitar, a wholesome young church-going kid named Mark Pickerel on drums, and some other kid on bass. One night, I stood outside the door and listened to them running through an echo in the Bunnyman song and thought, not fucking bad. Eventually, Gary offered me a job behind the counter, as I had mainly cleaned up his repo sheet for him, and he found it difficult to entice his own kids to work in the store. Hey man, do you still have that drum set? Van asked one day when it was just him and me in the store. It wasn't a complete kit, only a floor tom, a ride cymbal, and a hi-hat that a guy I'd worked with at a restaurant had traded me years before in a weed deal. No, dude, I got rid of it. Why? Me and Pickerel are sick of playing with Lee. We want to start a new band. He's going to sing, and I'm playing guitar. We want you to be the drummer. Van, I can't play the fucking drums. Are you crazy? Sorry, bud, but no thanks. It'll be easy. Pickerel can teach you. You're the only guy we know who's into the kind of music we dig. Young Mark Pickerel was already a very good drummer and a very good singer. Van and Pickerel didn't like Lee and wanted to play without him. I'll think about it, man, but I can't promise you it's going to work out. Their previous covers band had played punk and new wave tunes to in different crowds at school functions, church events, and other local self-made gigs. I saw no benefit in that. It led nowhere. On a night, I had to go to their family home to bring Gary something from work. His gregarious wife, Kathy, insisted I sit down and have dinner with the family, even though my friend Van wasn't around. Mark, do you enjoy working at the store? I hear that you're a fan of the same music the boys like. Yes, ma'am, I like it very much. Thank you for hiring me. Before Van, I never met one person who liked the same music as me, so it was a pretty big deal for me to become friends with him. Well, you know that Lee writes his own songs, don't you? I think they're very good. Lee, she yelled from the kitchen table. An angry voice came from somewhere in the house. What? Leave me alone. For fuck's sake, I'm doing something. I presumed that voice belonged to Lee. I'd seen him around, but we'd never spoken. Lee, you get out here and take Mark into your room and show him your songs. Lee came stomping into the kitchen. Without looking me in the eyes, he said, Come on, then. I followed him into his bedroom. It was decorated with cartoonish psychedelia like the set of the show Laugh-In. Ornate hippie tapestries hanging off walls painted purple and green. What was the deal with this guy? Was he a fucking deadhead? So I'm working on this tune right now. You want to hear it? I did, but first I asked, what kind of cassette player is that? I'd never seen someone recording their own music. It's not a cassette player. It's a Tascam, a 4-track cassette recorder. I record a different instrument on each track and then mix them together, and it ends up being a demo. What about singing? Do you put that on there too? Yeah, I can bounce shit over to give myself more tracks and then use one for vocals, he said, going straight over my head. Anyway, here's my new one. He handed me the headphones. I put them on, and he hit play. The music was up-tempo, guitar-heavy, raw. The tune was filled with hooks, and the vocal part was surprisingly catchy. I couldn't understand many of the words, but from what I could make out, they were a bit corny. It wasn't punk or even modern like the tunes I'd heard them rehearse in the back room, but it was rough and aggressive. Despite the silly lyrics, I recognized the demo as something pretty cool, something with rugged potential. I was impressed this weird dude who created this in his bedroom. That's great, man. How many of these have you done? Probably 50 to 75 so far. I've been recording for a couple of years. Jesus Christ. I couldn't believe he'd written so many songs by himself. Van had never mentioned this aspect of his brother's life. Can I hear some more? I spent the next couple hours alone with Lee in his room, listening intently to a shitload of catchy, rough-hewn 60s garage band-styled tunes. I'd had no inkling he or anyone in town was capable of this. "Hey man, let me play you this new piece of music." He proceeded to play me one more song in the same vein as the others. "Do you want to sing something on this? Van told me about your first band." When I was 15, I'd worked as a janitor in a place called the Highway Grill and had been drafted to sing in a lame band with the two cooks. I'd lasted exactly one gig before I'd been fired. A drag of a party where we'd covered Styx, Van Halen, and even My Sharona. I laughed when Lee suggested I sing something over his music, but I was intrigued with his 4-track machine, this weirdo, and his songs. Over the next hour, he and I wrote cheesy words in a vocal part that felt appropriate for the garagey throwback tune. We recorded my vocals in his bedroom, an embarrassing song we called Pictures in My Mind. I rolled over the experience on my drive home. Van and Pickrell wanted him gone, but I had enjoyed writing and recording vocals for a song with this strange, mostly mute dude. Why were they ditching the only guy making original music, the only guy who wasn't content playing covers like every other stupid band in town? Lee was on to something, and I wanted in on it. "So I heard you and Lee wrote a song together last night," Van said when I saw him at work the next day. "Are you his new pal? Because you would be the first one he's ever had." "I wouldn't go that far. He's not very easy to talk to. But you guys are crazy to kick him out. Why didn't you ever say anything about the songs he's written? 75 fucking songs? I listened to a bunch of them. Dude, he's got talent. The words need an upgrade, but besides that, the lead guitar over everything, the songs are pretty cool. He can write the fuck out of a hook." Van looked perplexed. "I never really thought about it," he said. "I always thought of it as his hobby, and playing covers was our serious thing." "You get that backwards, man. Playing originals is the only way to be a serious band. I'll tell you what, I'll be in a band with you and Pickerel, but only under the condition that you let your brother back in and we play as originals." Van didn't say anything for a minute. "Okay, my mom hit the roof anyway when she heard we were kicking him out. You'll have to sing. I'll have to play bass. Pix will stay on drums." "Deal," I said. We took our name from an old electro-harmonics guitar pedal called the Screaming Tree. The irony was, it was a treble booster, and Lee already had the thinnest, most piercing, and shittiest sounding guitar tone. In time, it became clear that Lee and I could not get along. I tried my damnedest to be friendly with him, but it was like talking to a stone. His only two speeds were mute or enraged. I would often hear him screaming, "Fuck you, Gary," at his dad on the phone. He treated the store like it was his own private bank. He would come walking in, grab a couple $100, tell his dad to fuck off, and walk out again. Despite how much we'd enjoyed hanging out and recording that first evening, I was never again asked to contribute a vocal part or lyrics to a song. Although I recognized his gift for writing catchy hooks, everything else began to get on my nerves in a big way. His lyrics were the furthest thing from good, filled with phony lines about butterflies, rainbows, smiling cats, just meaningless garbage of the worst kind. I tried every way possible to steer him towards something cool, something of our time, but it was an impossibility. The words were already completely embedded in the song, hook and melody. Time and again, I tried to change them into something that fit phonetically, but that held some sort of personal meaning to me. It was a maddening battle, one I rarely, if ever, won. But if Screaming Trees could get me out of Ellensburg, well then that was something else. From my earliest memories, I had hated this dead-end redneck town, hated the ignorant, right-wing, white trash hay farmers and cattlemen talking constantly about the weather, hated the constant battering wind that blew the putrid smell of cow shit everywhere. I knew there was a world outside waiting for me, and repeatedly tried to escape. At age 15, I'd signed up for the National Guard and labored through the 8-hour test that may as well have been written in hieroglyphics. I left page after page completely blank, totally unable to understand a goddamn thing. Then I begged my father to rescind his approval after I found out that I qualified for only the lowliest of jobs, the bottom rung on the ladder. I joined a traveling circus, but was quickly fired for bizarrely refusing to cut my hair. Poor grades in my prison sentence had destroyed the fantasy of my baseball career to prevent me from leaving. Then my mangled legs had done it again. I felt cursed, trapped in an unending cycle of pointless work and petty crime, circling around town endlessly with 1,000-yard stare, desperate to escape my hometown and the diseased darkness it bred and festered in me. I had always had a strong fascination with the perverse and strange. In my early teens, I saw a vintage photo of a fully tattooed man and immediately began to tattoo myself with a sewing needle wrapped in thread and dipped into a jar of India ink I'd shoplifted from the college bookstore. Crude, jailhouse-looking tattoos, but I knew from the moment I saw that photo that someday I'd be covered in them. When I got a hold of William Burroughs' book Junkie, I knew then that I would also be a heroin addict someday. Rummaging around underneath the stands at the local college football field at age 10, I'd come across a pristine copy of Anais Nin's Adulthood Venus. That helped me cultivate elaborate sexual fantasies and secret sexual obsessions of every sort and stripe. I wanted excitement, adventure, decadence, depravity, anything, everything. I would never find any of it in this dusty, isolated cowtown. If this band could get me out, get me that life I so craved, it was worth any indignity, any hardship, any torture.
All right, now on to chapter 2, if I can find it.
Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The Fragile Kingdom.
Hey, not much, Bob Zombie. Just going over Mark Lanegan's book, chapter 2.
Only 6 months after our first practice, Screamy Trees went into the recording studio Creative Fire in Ellensburg and made our demo with Steve Fisk producing, a blatant 60s garage band ripoff called Other Worlds. It was released by the owner of the recording studio on his Velvetone label. The only other record Velvetone had put out was an embarrassing piece of shit called Winnebago Weekend, an album of comedy songs about the joys of RVing. Calvin Johnson, a childhood acquaintance of mine who had moved away while we were still in grade school, was now a successful underground musician living in Olympia. His band Beat Happening were a study in cool, catchy, idiosyncratic primitivism. I loved their music and Calvin's singularly offbeat singing style of performance. He had a cassette-only label called K. Steve Fisk was tight with them, and K started to distribute our cassette EP and help us get shows. It was only moments into the first song at our first show in Western Washington that I really understood what I was dealing with. From the first note, Lee Connor went absolutely nuts, stomping, windmilling, and rampaging across the stage and back like a maniac. My jaw dropped at the sheer audacity of his performance, as did that of every member of the small audience. I had never seen it coming. There had been no indication that he'd behave like this once he got in front of people. Of course, the moment the show ended, he turned back into the brooding, silent hulk that reminded me of the textbook example of a savant. But that almost didn't matter. I and everyone else in the room had been blown away by his onstage histrionics. The Connor brothers' father put up $1,000 for us to record a full-length album called Clairvoyance that was also released on Velvetone. It was perhaps even shittier than our first recording, but by then we'd met someone who thought we could do better. The second time the Trees ever played live was opening for a loud, nuanced power trio from Portland called the Wipers. The Wipers were gods in Western Washington and Oregon. I hadn't gotten into their records, but when I witnessed it live, it stunned me like a kick to the head and I was hooked. And after that, listened to their records constantly. Their guitarist and singer was Greg Sage, a leader so charismatic that even his drummer and bass players stared at him with rapt attention throughout their concerts, his snow-white hair always covered by a bandana. Was Sage 40? 50? He was at least 10 years older than anyone else I knew, but still making vital, cool, underground rock in our part of the world, the Northwest Gold Standard. Much to our thrill, Sage took an interest in the band and inserted himself into our naive circle. I began to hang out with him from time to time in Portland, glad to be around this genius musician, hoping to learn something from him to take back to my band to improve it. We'd meet at a bar where he ate lunch in a seedy area of Portland, then we'd walk back to his place and talk. He concocted a plan to get the Trees signed to Enigma, the independent label that put out his records. Then he himself would produce our records. Sage had produced the First Beat Happening album, which I adored, so that was enough for me. Eventually, we received a huge 20-page contract in the mail from an Enigma offshoot label. I was immediately put off by the offer. Pink Dust appeared to be their boutique label for fake 60s psychedelia. Granted, they did have Rocky Erickson, the former singer of the 13th Floor Elevators, who we all worshipped. But their assumption that we belonged on Pink Dust with that non-punk, weak, throwback gang of rank imitators made me more determined than ever to change the trajectory of our band. I'd be damned if we didn't transcend that corny hippie ghetto and create something more original and modern. Not only was the money terrible, it was also an incredibly long 7-record deal that could tie us up forever. Still, it was the only offer on the table, and we made plans to sign it. Then, while working in the video store one day, I got a phone call out of the blue. Is this Mark Lanegan? Who's this? It's Greg Ginn from SST Records calling. Pickerel had gone to see Black Flag play at the boxing club in Seattle and managed to get a cassette of our first EP into the hands of Greg Ginn, Black Flag's guitarist and the owner of SST Records. On our first tour, we had stayed at the apartment of an old friend of Fisk's while in Los Angeles, an employee of SST named Ray Farrell. When Ray had seen us play in a record store in Santa Monica, he had instantly gone from a curmudgeonly dude who was doing a pal a favor to an overgrown teenager giddy with excitement. Greg Sage had also been in town, and we had given him a ride back to his motel after we had performed. I couldn't help but notice the way he played with Pickerel's hair and whispered in his ear during the ride. Ginn had liked the cassette, and that, combined with Ray Farrell's enthusiastic report of our live show, had piqued his interest. Now he wanted to sign us. His offer was for only one record at a time, but no one had ever been dropped by SST. So we were free to make records with them as long as we wanted, or leave to go to another label. It was such an unreal lucky break that I didn't believe it was actually him on the phone, but someone playing a joke on me. I called off the Pink Dust deal. Sage was furious with me. The next time I saw him, after a Trees show in Portland, he insisted I go with him to Pioneer Pies for coffee, where he spent an hour berating me. Do you realize what damage you've done to my reputation, my standing at Enigma? I personally stuck my neck out for you, and you fucked me over. Get on the payphone right now and tell SST you're not signing. It was clear from the desperate hostility of his outburst that his interest was in something other than our music. Our just-turned 21-year-old drummer, Mark Pickerel, was a very handsome kid who drew a lot of attention from men and women both. But as a devout Christian, Pickerel was often ignorant of people's intentions, blind to the bounty of sex he could have had. One day, Sage, at his storage unit / apartment / cat shit covered floor recording studio, had told me that he would need the band there for just 3 days to record our parts. But Pickerel would need to be there for 2 to 3 weeks to get the drums right. I was far from a genius, but I could see his intent from a mile away. I instantly thought, right, 2 to 3 weeks to overdub drums on an 8-track recording? And weren't the drums the quietest, weakest thing on all of the Wipers records anyway? At every Wipers show, Sage was always accompanied by some youngish dude. I knew grooming when I saw one, and whenever he was around Pix, he acted like a teenager in love. I would always see him touching Pix, talking quietly and intently into his ears, staring into his eyes while rubbing his shoulders. Sage just wanted to get with our drummer, plain and simple. Without knowing it, Pickerel had nearly gotten us supremely fucked and then saved our asses. We'd built a reputation for a crazed, must-see live show, but being the first Washington band to sign with SST brought us instant credibility in the Northwest scene, and with it, hope for the future. SST immediately put us in the studio and then out on the road. We played a show opening for the SST band Firehose, one of the first things we did as part of the label. Firehose was the new band of legendary Minutemen bassist Mike Watt. The oversized Connor boys reminded him of his late Minutemen bandmate D. Boone. Watt took an instant liking to us, and our first 2 full-length tours for SST ended up being opening slots for Firehose. Our payment for the first tour was $100 a night, bumped up to $200 for the second tour. It was just barely enough to pay for our gasoline to get us from place to place and the occasional one room for everyone to share at a Motel 6. Watt was such a tightwad that he had the nerve to bum rush our room some nights and lie there snoring for free, never offering to help pay the $60 bill. But it was a thrilling education for some small-town country boys. I myself had never even been east of the Rockies until then. The day after returning to Ellensburg from traveling the United States on our inaugural SST tour, I woke up ready to hit the road again. After seeing the rest of the country, Ellensburg seemed even tinier, even more lifeless than I'd remembered. I shuddered as I saw my hometown again for the first time with the eyes of a stranger. Not one business or house over 2 stories high. I'd become inoculated to its quaint, i.e. empty, downtown with not one thing for a kid to do, much less a man in his 20s who no longer drank or did drugs. Being home again, even for such a brief moment, made me begin to unravel. I had to keep moving or else I was going to lose my mind for real. My girlfriend at the time was distraught. I can't live like this. You need to see a doctor and get some professional counseling, but you're too sick to see it. For what? Give me a fucking break. All I'm doing is going for a goddamn ride, not flying to Saturn. Get help or I'm leaving. You're the one who needs help, honey. And keep your fucking voice down. I'd rather not become known as a building wife beater if that's all right with you. I walked out, got into our extra long Ford Econoline touring van and drove all day, 300 miles to far eastern Washington, only returning after midnight. The monotony of the hours and hours of stultifying boredom that went in hand with SST's aggressive touring schedule was brutal. We were game at first, young, hungry, and totally unprepared for the rough education that came with endless, thankless touring. We played at every shitty dive bar, college student union, record store, and house party willing to have us perform for $100 a night, driving across the U.S. for months on end. If we didn't find someone to put us up, or I didn't find a girl to take me home, then that meant getting one room at a Motel 6 for the entire band, plus our sound man and our t-shirt salesman. Bleak nights like these, I opted to sleep on the couch in our van to guard the equipment. Not because I thought anyone would break into our piece of shit vehicle with the name of the previous owner's carpet cleaning business still painted on its side. Mostly so I'd not have to lie sleepless next to someone I detested in a dank, crowded room where the snoring was nearly as loud as our stage show. Violence had been an occupational hazard of Tree's live performance from the very beginning. At one of our first shows, someone had called one of my bandmates fat, and I had gone out into the crowd to settle it. The Connor brothers almost only ever fought each other. It was like a bad movie I watched through half-closed eyes. 2 massive men fighting over money, food, seats in the vehicle, anything, everything, sometimes on stage in full view of the audience. It had become clear that I didn't have one thing in common with Lee Connor, and I began to take an unhealthy pleasure in occasionally watching his younger brother beat the shit out of him. He had it coming every time. Lee was completely inept socially and expected the world to come to him, something that was never going to happen. He comported himself like a fucking prima donna, a hillbilly diva who considered himself a genius. He treated strangers, venue employees, co-workers, fans, crew, record company people, family, and everyone else he encountered like they were shit on his shoes, barely qualified to do his bidding. He was a stone prick, and we were constantly at odds over the songs, the direction of the band, his all-important wants and demands, almost everything. He became obsessive with jealousy when he saw me getting laid nearly every other day while no woman would ever approach him. And why would they? With his huge, baggy, tie-dyed pant legs tucked into his boots, His 60s style sunglasses worn indoors, and silent, brooding, menacing effect, he projected an unwelcoming, unhappy, borderline scary presence. One tour ended with a show in Pittsburgh, leaving us to drive the entire length of the country to get home. As the guys were discussing their future plans, I took that moment to tell them that this had been my last tour. I no longer wanted to be in the band. Lee, who was driving at the time, pulled maniacally off the road into a gas station. He jumped out of the Econoline and ran to the rear, where he yanked open the back doors and began pulling out all of the equipment and our personal shit, throwing it into the parking lot. I was incensed, as were Pickerel and Van. Van, who never needed a reason to get physical with his brother, ran to the back of the vehicle and began to slug Lee in the face and the side of the head as hard as he possibly could, screaming at him the entire time to stop. For the first time ever, Lee didn't cower from his younger brother. Undeterred by the attack, Lee continued methodically laying waste to all of our stuff. I jumped in and slugged Lee in the head several times, but it felt like my fist was making contact with the cinder block. He withstood all of it until every last piece of our shit was strewn across the parking lot. He then grabbed his own bag and waddled off into the distance, and I took one last opportunity to try and inflict some damage on him. From a backstage catering area somewhere, he had hoarded several round metal tins full of cookies for himself, which he had left in the van. I quickly hurled them after his retreating form, one after another. With a teenage varsity quarterback's precision, I banked can after can off his retreating head and back from a considerable distance away. Of course, when he sat sullenly by himself at the other side of the parking lot, Van and Pix pleaded with me to tell him I wouldn't quit and coax him back into the vehicle so that we could continue home. Fuck that. Leave his ass here. Fuck that prick. Van sheepishly admitted his mom would kill him if we left her coddled, spoiled, and entitled firstborn favorite alongside an East Coast highway all by himself. There was no way he could go home without him. The standoff stretched to over an hour before I gave in. I finally went over to him, told him I would not quit, and got him back into the van. Of course, I intended to go back on my word as soon as I was home, no longer able to accept his inexplicably bizarre, infantile outbursts. And of course, my resolve melted when faced once more with my dead-end street existence in my hometown, and I joined again, desperate for a reason to get out of Dodge. Lee began trying to sneakily follow me around while on tour if I was in the company of a woman. If it hadn't angered me so much, it would have made me laugh to glance back down the street and see him try to quickly hide his huge body behind a tree or a car, then follow us again when we continued to walk. To me, his behavior had all the classic earmarks of a stalker. I caught him clandestinely spying on me while I was having sex in the van, in the backstage area, and once when I was unlucky enough to be forced to share a room with him, but had gone ahead and fucked someone anyway. He once made a veiled threat to tell my girlfriend about my cheating because he felt so sorry for her. I laughed out loud at the ludicrous notion that he cared about anyone but himself, and told him that if that ever happened, I would make it his last day on earth. I had a high tolerance for weirdos who exhibited disturbing, ugly, antisocial traits, since I clearly recognized them in my own damaged, fucked up, obsessive behaviors. But the dynamic between the Connor brothers was nearly impossible to bear. The band was sick, violent, depressing, destructive, and sometimes dangerous. But my entrapment in Ellensburg had become an infected, weeping wound. I had to fight the urge to stay in bed around the clock, sleeping the days away, prisoner to sloth and mounting anxiety. Bad as things were, I saw the band as my ticket out of my go-nowhere life in my hometown, my only ticket out. For that, I endured the constant Connor shit show, the cornball lyrics, the self-imposed indignity of singing songs written in keys so far out of my natural range that it was a daily headache-inducing bitch to play them live. But I called it right. Through luck and comic, tragic circumstance, Screaming Trees indeed became my way out. I was, in short time, traveling the U.S. and Europe, stumbling from one drunken, drug-fueled mishap to another, and taking advantage of whatever sex, drugs, or money that came my way. The monotony and suffering of those early Trees tours was a bad movie, but not one without moments of unintended comedy, however. Our merch man at the time was a childhood friend of mine named Matt Barnum, whose father had been the punchboard salesman I'd stolen from as a youngster. We were being harassed by cops just after leaving a gig in Princeton, New Jersey. As the sirens and lights came on, from my seat next to me on the couch, I watched as he took a huge baggie of dirt-dry, shitty, full of seeds and stems weed out of his pocket, poured the entire contents into his mouth, and then shoved the empty bag under the couch cushion. After the cop had taken all of our IDs back to his car, Matt motioned to whoever was riding shotgun to hand him the can of soda from the tray between the two front seats.
I just want to pause it right there and say something. So I'm writing because I'm working on another video. Just going to start out something like this. Why are certain YouTubers who speak to Joe and know firsthand that Joe is saying that Mark took part in an attack on Kurt in the basement, why are they wanting to deny what Joe is saying about Mark being directly involved in the murder? Why are popular YouTube channels going against Joe's own words and trying to discredit his full testimony and major details of it? Why? Isaac Cappy, he connected certain YouTube channels as well as all being secretly involved with celebrities that are putting out misinformation and disinformation for them. And I myself was a victim of that in 2019 to 2020 in the Isaac Cappy case. And I wasn't even aware that I was doing that for Seth Green, the actor, until 2021. So Michelle and Lisa or whoever else could be a victim of that too and not realize it. They just see it as a golden opportunity to get involved and do something online. Yeah, I'm going to end with that and get on to making that video. And I'll probably be back around and just continue where we left off with Mark Lanegan's book, Sing Backwards and Weep. All right. Good night, everyone, and I'll probably see you later. Thank you for joining.